Imagine standing in the heart of the jungle, the air so thick with humidity you can almost drink it. A howler monkey's cry rips through the canopy, a sound that has echoed here for millennia. Pushing aside a curtain of vines, we come face to face with a stone titan. A pyramid, its steps climbing towards a sky it has not touched for over 1,000 years. This is what remains of the Maya, a civilization of brilliant astronomers, mathematicians, and architects who built metropolises in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. And then, at the height of their power, they simply walked away. Their cities were swallowed by the forest, their history written in a language we have only recently begun to understand. How did it happen? The answer is not a single catastrophic event. It is a slow, terrifying story of a people who became victims of their own stunning success, a cautionary tale etched in stone and bone. It is the story of a war they waged not against a rival kingdom, but against the very environment that sustained them. To truly comprehend the mystery of their collapse, a story that resonates with alarming clarity today, we invite you to join us on this exploration. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you do not miss a single step of our journey into the silent heart of this lost world. Let us travel back with our mind's eye to the year 750, the absolute zenith of the classic Maya period. We find ourselves not in an untamed wilderness, but in the sprawling urban heart of a city like Tikal. The air hums with the voices of 100,000 people. Stone causeways, gleaming white with plaster, connect towering temple complexes that pierce the jungle canopy. Here, we witness the processions of divine kings, adorned in jade and the iridescent feathers of the Quetzal bird. They are more than mere rulers. They are living conduits to the gods, their every action a sacred performance meant to maintain cosmic balance. They charted the movements of the stars with a precision unmatched in Europe for centuries, developed a complex writing system, and created a calendar of breathtaking accuracy. To us, it looks like a golden age, a civilization in perfect harmony with its world. But look closer. The very symbols of their power were telling a different story. Those brilliant white pyramids and palaces demanded a staggering environmental price. To create the stucco plaster that coated their cities, the Maya needed to burn limestone in vast pits, a process that required an immense amount of firewood. For every magnificent temple we see rising from the jungle floor, we must also imagine a corresponding void in the forest. This was the engine of their society, an engine that ran on trees. And it was voracious. The demand for wood was compounded by an even greater hunger, the need for land. Their burgeoning population, a testament to their agricultural success, required ever more fields of maize, beans, and squash. The Maya were master farmers, but their solution to feeding more mouths was brutally simple: clear more land. The forest was not seen as a sacred ecosystem to be preserved, but as a frontier to be conquered, acre by relentless acre. With each swing of the stone axe, they pushed the jungle back, creating a vast denuded landscape around their cities. For generations, this strategy worked. The rains came, the corn grew, the cities expanded, and the divine kings took the credit, their authority cemented by the apparent favor of the gods. But something was changing, subtly at first. The soil, stripped of its protective tree cover, began to erode under the tropical downpours, washing away into the seasonal swamps. The local climate, no longer regulated by the dense humid forest, started to shift. The kings, seeing the first signs of trouble, did what they had always done. They built grander temples, performed more elaborate ceremonies, and offered more precious blood to appease the deities. From atop their pyramids, They stared at the sky, pleading with the rain god Chak for the life-giving waters. But as the 8th century drew to a close, they would find their prayers were being offered to a sky that was growing deafeningly, terrifyingly silent. The sky may have been growing quiet, but for centuries, the Maya had been masters of a silent conversation with water. To truly appreciate their genius, we need to look beneath the surface of their cities, quite literally. Let us imagine ourselves walking not on the grand plazas, but along the intricate network of channels and sluices that fed them. These were not just ceremonial centers, they were colossal water collection systems. Every gleaming plaster surface, every courtyard and pyramid was angled with breathtaking precision to funnel precious rainwater into vast man-made reservoirs. In a city like Tikal, these reservoirs could hold many millions of gallons, a life-saving reserve designed to carry 100,000 people through the predictable 5-month dry season. They sculpted the very landscape to serve their thirst. Here we find evidence of a civilization that did not merely settle in the jungle. They re-engineered it. We can see them not as passive farmers at the mercy of the seasons, but as hydraulic engineers of the highest order. Beyond the cities, in the swampy lowlands, they constructed vast networks of raised fields, island gardens crisscrossed by canals that provided irrigation, transportation, and even fertilizer in the form of dredged muck. On the hillsides, they carved intricate terraces, transforming steep, unusable slopes into productive agricultural land. They were agricultural architects, building a food production machine capable of sustaining a population density comparable to some modern rural counties. This entire sophisticated system was predicated on one fundamental assumption, that the rains, though seasonal, would always return. It was a perfectly calibrated machine for a predictable world. And this is where we uncover the tragic irony at the heart of the Maya story. Their success became their undoing. Each successful harvest, each year the reservoirs held firm, allowed the population to grow. More people required more food, which in turn required clearing more forest for more maize fields. What we are witnessing is a civilization running at its absolute peak, its engine of growth humming with such power that no one seemed to notice it was consuming its own fuel source. To the common farmer toiling in his field or the artisan carving a stone monument, the world must have seemed ordered and divinely sanctioned. The kings on their thrones were the guarantors of this order, their rituals the sacred link that kept the cosmos in balance and the corn growing tall. But by the early 9th century, the balance was tipping. The seasonal dry spells began to stretch, lingering with a malevolent persistence. The brilliant reservoirs, once a symbol of Maya foresight, were no longer fully replenishing during the shortened wet seasons. We can almost feel the collective anxiety rising with the heat. The meticulously engineered canals began to run low. The soil in the raised fields started to crack and turn to dust. The sun beat down with an unfamiliar cruelty, bleaching the sky to a pale, unforgiving white. The divine kings, who had once danced in the rain, now stood on their pyramids under a cloudless bronze sky, their promises echoing hollowly in the dry air. Their authority, once as solid as the stone they commanded, was beginning to fracture. To understand the king's crisis, we must first understand the foundation of his power, which was not built on earth, but in the heavens. Let us ascend the steep steps of a pyramid at a city like Copan, not to the sacrificial altar, but to a small, dark room near the summit. This was an observatory. Through precisely angled shafts in the stone, the Aho, the divine lord, and his specialized priests tracked the celestial ballet. They did not merely watch the stars, they read them as a sacred text, a divine script that dictated the rhythms of life and death. Their authority was rooted in this cosmic literacy. They could predict the solstice, the exact day for planting maize. They could foretell a solar eclipse, transforming a moment of terrifying darkness into a display of their own sacred communion with the gods. Power like this was absolute, a mandate written in the movements of planets. We can almost hear the hushed awe of the masses as the king, arrayed in jaguar pelts and jade, announced the precise moment a planet would halt its backward journey across the sky. He was the master of the calendar, the keeper of time itself. Here, we must grasp a fundamental truth of the Maya worldview. The universe was a great cyclical machine, and the king was its chief engineer. His rituals, his public bloodlettings, were not mere spectacles. They were the essential maintenance that kept the sun rising, the seasons turning, and the rain falling. For centuries, this sacred contract held. The kings performed their celestial duties, and the earth provided its bounty. But as the 9th century wore on, the machine began to sputter. The rain, the most crucial cog in the entire system, was failing. And here we witness the fatal flaw in the king's cosmic logic. Faced with a terrestrial ecological crisis of their own making, they looked for an answer in the only place they knew, the sky. Their response was not to manage the forests or the water, but to double down on ritual. If the gods were displeased, the offerings must be grander, the temples taller, the ceremonies more elaborate. We can picture the frantic activity. Thousands of workers felling the last great stands of timber, not just for farmland, but to fuel the lime kilns, producing ever more stucco to plaster new monuments proclaiming the king's piety. Imagine the immense pressure on a single ruler. He is fulfilling his end of the divine bargain with flawless precision. His astronomers confirm that Venus is appearing exactly as prophesied. His scribes are carving stelae, towering stone monuments that boast of his lineage and his sacred power. Yet his people are starving. The very acts intended to restore balance were now accelerating the catastrophe, a desperate feedback loop of devotion and destruction. The stone portraits from this era show rulers with an almost desperate intensity, their faces locked in a mask of divine confidence, while their world withered around them. The sky was telling them one story, a timeless epic of cosmic order. The cracked earth beneath their feet was telling another, a brutal tale of consequence they were utterly unequipped to read. The cracked earth was not merely a symptom, it became a character in their story, a silent, unforgiving adversary. Let us walk the wide causeways of a city like Calakmul in the year 860. The white plaster, once blindingly bright, is now dulled by a perpetual film of orange dust. The air, which should be heavy with the scent of tropical blossoms and damp earth, instead carries the dry, rasping smell of decay. We see it in the faces of the people, the sharp cheekbones, the listless eyes, the children with swollen bellies. The evidence of prolonged malnutrition is etched into their very skeletons, a story archaeologists can now read with chilling clarity. These were not the proud, robust people who had raised these monuments. These were their ghosts, haunting the city before it was even abandoned. Let us venture into what was once the heart of the city, the bustling marketplace, where merchants once bartered for vibrant textiles, sharp obsidian, and precious salt. There is now a desperate quiet. We can picture a woman, not trading a surplus of maize, but offering a finely crafted ceramic pot, a family heirloom, for a single gourd of water. The complex economic web that bound the Maya world together was fraying, thread by thread. Trade routes that had pulsed with life for 500 years withered. Why send jade or feathers to a city that could not offer the one commodity that now mattered more than any other, food? The intricate system of tribute and commerce that had fueled the Maya engine was seizing up, starved not of wealth, but of water. Here we confront the awesome, terrifying power of the mega-drought. This was not just a longer dry season. We now know from analyzing lakebed sediments and cave formations that this was a period of sustained, multi-decade climate change, punctuated by years of extreme drought unparalleled for over 1,000 years. Their entire world, a masterpiece of engineering and agricultural knowledge, was designed for a predictable rhythm of wet and dry. The reservoirs that were once great, their ultimate insurance policy, became their greatest liability. Imagine standing at the bottom of one. We look up at the stone walls, an incredible feat of human labor. But instead of water, we see a floor of baked, fractured mud, littered with the bones of fish and turtles. The life-saving basins had transformed into vast, empty monuments to a climate that no longer existed. The psychological impact must have been shattering. For generations, the Maya had lived by a divine contract. The kings honored the gods, and the gods provided rain. Now, that promise was broken. Imagine the growing whispers in the plazas, the furtive glances towards the silent temples. The king, still draped in his ceremonial finery, still performing the ancient rites on his pyramid, was no longer a reassuring figure. He was a symbol of a cosmic order that had failed. The stelae they carved in these final desperate years show rulers still proclaiming their victories and their divine connections, an almost frantic effort to project an authority that was evaporating with the last drops of water. A new, terrifying question must have begun to form in the minds of the people, a thought that undermined the very foundations of their universe. What if the gods were not listening anymore? That question, once unthinkable, now hung in the smoky air, heavier than the dust itself. When the divine dialogue ceases, the silence is filled not with peace, but with the clamor of human desperation. Let us move away from the ceremonial heart of the city, from the silent pyramids where the kings performed for deaf gods. Let us instead walk through the sprawling, closely packed neighborhoods that housed the tens of thousands of ordinary people. For generations, the hum of these communities was the lifeblood of the Maya world, the pat, pat, pat of hands shaping maize tortillas, the chatter of merchants, the laughter of children. But by the late 900s, this soundscape had changed. The dominant sound was now the thin, persistent wail of a hungry child. Here, we witness the brutal calculus of the population bomb. We see houses, once neatly spaced, now crowded one against the other, their thatched roofs almost touching. Families were forced to build on any available patch of land, even on the slopes of refuse heaps. Sanitation, once manageable, became impossible. The air grew thick with the stench of human waste and disease. We could almost smell the desperation in the smoke from their cooking fires. They were no longer burning well-seasoned oak, but green, sappy wood scavenged from the last remaining thickets, a fuel that gave more smoke than heat. This was not a city, a symbol of collective achievement. It had become a trap, a sprawling prison of hunger where every neighbor was a competitor for the last mouthful of food, the last cup of water. This is where the war with nature turned inward, becoming a war between people. The archaeological record gives us a chilling clue. Around this time, in cities that had stood open and confident for 700 years, we see the sudden appearance of defensive walls. Great palisades and hastily constructed stone barricades were thrown up, not just around the entire city, but around the central elite districts. Let us pause and consider what this truly means. The kings were not fortifying their kingdoms against a rival city-state. They were walling themselves in, protecting the last of the grain stores and the palace reservoirs from their own starving population. The elegant carvings on temple walls depicted ritual combat between noble lords, a sacred ballet of power. The reality in the streets below was far uglier, a desperate, chaotic struggle for survival. The social contract, like the reservoirs, had run dry. The farmer who had once dutifully given a portion of his harvest as tribute to the king now had nothing to give, and no reason to do so. The authority of the Ahau, once written in the stars, could not fill a single empty stomach. Imagine the scene. A divine lord, a man who believed himself a conduit to the cosmos, now a prisoner in his own palace, listening to the angry murmurs of the people he could no longer feed or control. The final stelae carved during this period are almost tragic, boasting of dynastic histories and divine favor to a populace that had lost its faith. The great stone monuments were no longer a testament to a living power. They were becoming tombstones for a way of life that had consumed itself from within. Those stone monuments, the final desperate assertions of divine right, became their own indictment. To truly understand the catastrophe, we must look past the carvings and see the stone itself, and ask a very simple question: what did it cost? Let us stand in the shadow of a great temple, its surface once a brilliant, unbroken white. That gleaming stucco finish, a hallmark of Mayan glory, was the product of a truly voracious industry. We must imagine not just artisans and priests, but legions of laborers felling the jungle for miles around, not for farmland, but for fuel. They were feeding immense hungry pits of fire, kilns that had to reach over 800 degrees Celsius to break down limestone into the fine powder needed for plaster. The numbers are staggering. Modern science estimates that to produce just 1 square meter of that beautiful lime plaster, the Maya needed to burn nearly 20 mature trees. Now, let us look up again at that single pyramid. Think of the thousands upon thousands of square meters covering not just this one structure, but every palace, every plaza, every elite home in a city of 100,000 people. The math becomes terrifying. We are witnessing an entire civilization quite literally burning its own world to build monuments to its greatness. It was a slow poison, an environmental debt being accumulated over generations, with the bill coming due all at once. The forest was not an obstacle. It was the finite fuel tank for their entire cultural engine, and the needle was hitting empty. Here we can truly grasp the feedback loop from hell they had created. The more the drought bit, the more the kings commissioned new temples and ceremonies to appease the gods. The more temples they built, the more forests they had to clear to create the plaster to cover them. And the more forests they cleared, the worse the drought became. This was not just bad luck, it was physics. A lush rainforest creates its own weather, recycling moisture into the atmosphere to create clouds and rain. When we replace that with a vast pale expanse of limestone plaster and barren cornfields, we change the equation. The new landscape reflected sunlight and heat back into the sky, actively preventing the formation of rain clouds. They were building a giant mirror that pushed the life-giving rain away. What we are looking at is not merely a backdrop for their cities, but an active participant in their downfall. We can imagine a Mayan farmer whose grandfather had to walk only a few hundred paces for firewood, now having to trek half a day into the denuded, sun-blasted hills to find a single suitable tree. We can see the vital topsoil, no longer held in place by a web of roots, hemorrhaging from the hillsides with every brief violent downpour, turning the rivers brown and silting up the precious reservoirs. The jungle, once a seemingly infinite pantry that provided medicinal plants, game, and spiritual solace, was becoming an alien landscape. They had not just cleared the forest, they had erased their own world, leaving themselves stranded on a scorched earth of their own making, under a sky that no longer recognized them. The sky that had forgotten them offered no answers, only a flat, indifferent glare. This was the new reality in the year 900. The silence from the heavens was no longer a temporary absence. It felt like a judgment. We can almost feel the people's gaze shifting. For centuries, they looked up at the carved visages of the rain god, Chak, his distinctive hooked nose and curling fangs a promise of life-giving storms. Now we witness a subtle but profound change in how they see him. His image, once a comfort, had become a mockery, a stone effigy of a deity who had abandoned his post. The relationship was broken. The cosmic phone line had gone dead. Let us step away from the grand plazas and into the private courtyard of a family home. Here, in the flickering torchlight, we observe a different kind of faith taking root. An old woman, her face a road map of hardship, is not chanting prayers to the state gods. Instead, she places a simple offering of dried herbs and a single precious bead before a small, crude clay figure, one whose form has no place in the official pantheon. This is a return to something older, something more local and intimate, the spirits of the forest, the guardians of the earth itself. It is a quiet spiritual rebellion, a deeply personal attempt to bypass the failed divine kings and speak directly to a power that might still listen. The great unified faith that had bound the Mayan world was beginning to fray into 1,000 desperate individual pleas. This fracturing of belief had its parallel among the elite. We can imagine the scene inside a royal scriptorium. The scribes, the intellectuals of their time, faced an impossible task: how to chronicle the glory of the divine king when the world around them was withering. Their solution was a masterclass in political spin. The great stone stelae they carved in these final years are telling in what they omit. Gone are the proud proclamations of bountiful harvests. Instead, the hieroglyphs speak almost exclusively of warfare, of dynastic lineage, and of obscure calendrical rituals. We are watching them construct a Potemkin village of words, a reality where the king's power was measured not in the well-being of his people, but in his ability to shed the blood of his equally desperate neighbors. It was a frantic effort to shout down the terrible silence from the sky with the clash of obsidian blades. But for the common farmer, these stone boasts offered no sustenance, and so we become witnesses to a new phenomenon, one more terrifying to the lords of the cities than any invading army: the slow, silent exodus. Let us follow one family as they make an unthinkable choice. They stand at the edge of their dusty maize field, the stunted stalks rattling in the hot wind. Before them lies the city, its pyramids still majestic but offering no hope. Behind them lies the scrubby secondary growth of the jungle, a place of danger and uncertainty. Their decision is a testament to their despair. Packing little more than the clothes on their backs and a few tools, they turn their backs on the stone temples and the god kings. They walk away, becoming the first quiet refutation of the entire Mayan world order. This was not a collapse in the way we might imagine, not a single violent implosion. It was something quieter, more insidious. It was an unraveling. We can picture a king standing atop his pyramid, surveying his domain. He sees not a city teeming with life, but a city with growing patches of silence, of empty homes and untended fields. His scribes can carve whatever they wish. His warriors can drag back captives for the altars, but they cannot reverse this hollowing out. The city's greatest resource, its people, were bleeding away into the wilderness, taking the soul of the kingdom with them. The cracks in the sun-baked earth were now mirrored by the cracks in the very foundation of their society, widening with every family that chose the unforgiving jungle over the false promises of a dying paradise. The silent departure of a single family, swallowed by the jungle, was an act of rebellion more profound than any armed uprising. It was a vote of no confidence in the cosmos itself, and the kings, trapped atop their stone towers, finally understood. If they could not command the loyalty of the heavens, they would command it on earth through the only language that had not yet failed them: fear. We now see the royal response, not in new prayers carved in stone, but in the frantic sharpening of obsidian. The war against nature had failed. The war against their neighbors was about to begin. Let us follow a war party from a city like Dos Pilas as it moves through the withered landscape around the year 920. These are not the proud, plumed warriors of the classic stele, marching to a ritualized rhythm. They are gaunt, hardened men, their jaguar skin adornments hanging loosely on their frames. Their eyes are not filled with divine purpose, but with a raw, predatory hunger. Their mission is brutally simple. They are not seeking territory for their king or honor for their lineage. They are raiding for resources. They are hunting for food, for water, and most importantly, for people. Captives were no longer just for the sacrificial altar. They were a workforce to be enslaved, a last-ditch effort to tend the failing fields. Here we witness the horrifying perversion of Mayan warfare. The goal was no longer the capture of a rival noble for a glorious sacrifice. It was the razing of his cornfields, the smashing of his clay water jugs, the absolute annihilation of his people's ability to survive. These became known as the Serpent Wars, a name that evokes the coiled, striking desperation of a civilization turning on itself. We can see the smoke on the horizon, not from the lime kilns building temples, but from burning villages. The air, once thick with the promise of rain, now carried the acrid stench of burning thatch and human misery. The intricate web of alliances and rivalries that had defined their political world for centuries dissolved into a chaotic, all-against-all struggle for existence. The kings, who had once read their destiny in the grand, slow dance of the planets, now read it in the frantic, bloody skirmishes that erupted across their dying world. A victory in this new kind of war offered a brief, intoxicating illusion of control. A captured rival king, dragged in chains to the victor's plaza, became a powerful piece of theater. His public humiliation and sacrifice were a visceral demonstration that at least one king still possessed divine favor, even if that favor was now measured only in the spilling of blood. We can imagine the scene. A victorious Ahau, his face painted for war, standing over his kneeling captive as the crowd roars. For a moment, it must have felt like the old days. For a moment, he was a god among men once more. But when the blood dried on the plaza stones and the cheers faded, the same unforgiving sun rose the next day on the same thirsty fields. The captured farmers brought back from the raid were just more mouths to feed from already empty storehouses. The victory did not make the rain fall or the maize grow. It was a fever dream of power in a dying body. This vicious cycle of violence was the civilization's final convulsive act. A war that consumed the last of its strength, its people, and its hope. Their greatest victory was simply a prelude to their final disappearance. The blood on the plaza stones did not summon the clouds. The screams of a sacrificed rival king did not break the heavens. When the brief, brutal ecstasy of conquest faded, the victors were left with the same silent, searing sky, now mocking not only their prayers but their violence too. This was the terrifying revelation that dawned around the year 950. The drought was not a punishment to be appeased or an enemy to be conquered. It was simply the way the world was now. It had become the new permanent state of being, an epic of thirst with no foreseeable end. To truly understand what they faced, we must leave the Maya ruins for a moment and journey deep underground into the sacred caves they called cenotes. Here, in the slow, patient drip of water-forming stalagmites, modern science can read a history of the climate, molecule by molecule. And the story these stone formations tell is breathtaking. They show us that this was not a normal drought. The chemical signatures left behind reveal a pattern of recurring, multi-year dry spells of an intensity not seen for over 2,000 years. This was a true climatic shift, a century-long failure of the summer rains that were the very heartbeat of their civilization. Let us look closer at what this meant. The entire sophisticated calendar, the sacred rhythm of planting and harvesting that had been perfected over 30 generations, was now useless. The divine clock was broken. Imagine the psychological devastation. An elder whose wisdom was once the most valuable resource in his community now had nothing to offer. His lifetime of knowledge about when to burn the fields, when to plant the maize, was based on a world that had vanished. We can almost see him standing at the edge of a field, crumbling the lifeless, ashen soil in his hands, his authority turning to dust along with the earth. The very pillars of their society, the wisdom of the elders, and the divine mandate of the kings had proven to be illusions. All that was left was the sun, a relentless, indifferent God that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. Here we witness the final quiet death of the forest itself. The desperate regrowth, the scrubby trees that had replaced the ancient giants, could not survive this prolonged assault. The ecosystem reached a tipping point and shattered. The roar of the jaguar, the symbol of royal power and the spirit of the night, faded from the landscape. The vibrant flocks of macaws and parrots, whose feathers had adorned kings, disappeared. The silence that had begun in the sky now descended upon the earth. The world was not just thirsty. It was becoming empty. The war against nature was over, and nature, in its slow, inexorable way, had won a total victory. The Serpent Wars, once a fury of desperate violence, began to sputter out, not in a truce, but in sheer, debilitating exhaustion. There was simply nothing left to fight for. Sacking a neighboring village yielded not stores of grain, but more starving mouths. A city was no longer a prize. It was a stone tomb waiting for its last occupants to leave. And so they did. Let us watch a family, not fleeing in terror, but walking with a weary resignation past the great pyramids of what was once a mighty city. They do not even spare at a glance. Its monuments, its history, its gods are meaningless to them. Their only focus is the thin trail leading towards a distant water source, a future devoid of kings or cosmos. They are walking away not from a collapse, but from an irrelevance. The empty trail leading into the jungle was the final, unanswerable hieroglyph. It spoke a truth more profound than any carved on a stone monument. For the divine Lord left behind in his silent city, it was a message of utter damnation. Let us enter the stone labyrinth of his palace, not as subjects, but as unseen observers of a god in his twilight. We find him not on a high throne, but in a small, sweltering chamber, the painted murals on the walls peeling in the dry heat, revealing the bare stone beneath like a festering wound. The vibrant depictions of glorious battles and bountiful harvests now seem like a cruel joke. He is a king of ghosts, the ruler of an empire of echoes. Here we witness the final feudal motions of power. The king still wears the regalia of his office, but the heavy jade necklaces hang loosely on his emaciated frame. The magnificent headdress of Quetzal feathers, once a shimmering crown of green fire, is now a dusty, brittle relic that seems to weigh him down. We watch as he prepares for a bloodletting ritual, the most sacred communion between ruler and divinity. But the ceremony is a hollow pantomime. There is no crowd in the plaza below to witness his sacrifice. His audience consists of a few skeletal priests and a concubine whose eyes are vacant with hunger. The sharp obsidian lancet, once wielded with a steady precision, now trembles in his hand. The blood he offers to the thirsty earth is thin and pale, a meager offering from a body that has nothing left to give. The cosmic knowledge that was once the bedrock of his authority has become his torment. Let us imagine his scribes, the keepers of the sacred books, unrolling their brittle bark paper scrolls for the last time. The pages are filled with precise astronomical calculations, prophecies that have always come to pass, cycles of time that were believed to be eternal. But they find no answer here. There is no glyph for a world without rain, no prophecy for when the gods simply stop listening. The divine script has run out. We can almost hear the rustle of the pages as a scribe, his face a mask of despair, realizes that the accumulated wisdom of 500 years is now just a collection of meaningless marks. The universe they had so carefully mapped had betrayed them, revealing itself to be chaotic and indifferent. This collapse of faith was a poison that seeped into the very stones of the palace. The king, a man who was the literal axis of the world, was now just a man, trapped in a crumbling house. And so he makes a choice that would have been unthinkable to any of his ancestors. One evening, as a dust-choked twilight settles over the silent pyramids, he removes his jade ear spools. He lets the feathered cloak slide from his shoulders onto the stone floor. Stripped of his divinity, he is anonymous. We watch him walk out of his own palace, not as a god, but as one more refugee. He does not look back. There's nothing to see but a monument to a colossal, fatal misunderstanding. He follows the same path his people took, a path leading away from the spectacular failure of the sky and towards the simple, brutal reality of the earth, seeking not glory, but a mouthful of water. Behind him, the Jaguar throne sits empty, gathering dust in the profound silence, awaiting the slow, patient embrace of the jungle. The slow, patient embrace of the jungle did not happen overnight. First came the silence, then the scavengers. Let us walk these empty avenues in the years following the last king's departure, around 975. The city is not yet a ruin, but a husk, a stage where the final act of a tragedy is being played out by a handful of remaining actors. We see them not as a community, but as solitary ghosts picking through the bones of their own world. A man, his back bent with hardship, uses a stone to pry a piece of obsidian inlay from a palace wall, not for its sacred value, but for its sharp edge. A woman burns the carved wooden lintel of a temple doorway, a masterpiece of art and history, simply to cook a handful of scavenged roots. Here we witness the complete inversion of a universe. Everything that was once holy is now fuel. Everything once priceless is now a tool for survival. The great white causeways, built for the processions of gods and kings, now served a different purpose. They became arteries of departure, channels through which the city's remaining lifeblood slowly drained away. Let us follow one such group, not a cohesive tribe, but a loose collection of families bound by nothing more than a shared direction. They walk in a straggling line, their movements slow and deliberate, conserving every ounce of energy. The possessions they carry are heartbreakingly practical. A clay pot for water, a digging stick, a tattered blanket. We see no jade jewelry, no feathered ornaments. These are the things they chose to save, and their choices tell a story of a people who have shed every illusion. Their destination is not a new kingdom or a promised land. It is simply a place, rumored in whispers, where a spring still seeps from the earth or where a small lake has not yet turned to dust. This is the new cartography of their world, a map defined not by pyramids, but by puddles. A new kind of wisdom was being forged in this exodus, born of dust and desperation. The knowledge of the astronomer priest who could track the journey of Venus across the heavens was now useless. We can imagine a small group huddled around a meager fire at night. They listen not to tales of hero twins or the creation of the cosmos. The elder who holds their attention is not a scribe, but a hunter, a man whose hands are stained with the earth. He speaks in low tones, not of celestial cycles, but of which grubs found under a rotting log are safe to eat, how to read the tracks of a lizard in the sand, and how to find water by following the flight of a desperate bird. This was the new sacred text, a brutal gospel of survival being written on the fly, its verses dictated by the rumbling of an empty stomach. Authority no longer descended from the sky. It grew up from the cracked, unforgiving ground. Back in the stone cities, a different process was underway. By the year 1000, they were becoming monuments to a profound quiet. Let us stand in the central plaza of Tikal as the seasons turn. We can almost hear the soft thud of a piece of plaster falling from a high temple facade, a sound magnified 100 times by the immense silence. The first seeds carried on the wind find purchase in the cracks of the great ball court. A ceiba tree, a sacred world tree to their ancestors, begins its slow, relentless work, its roots probing the foundations of a king's tomb, seeking not power, but purchase and water. The jungle was not invading, it was simply returning home. It crept over the plazas and scaled the pyramids, its green tendrils a soft, living shroud for the hubris of a fallen world. The Maya did not vanish. We must be clear on this point. They did not simply disappear into thin air. They walked away. They adapted. What collapsed was not a people, but a political and religious system, a way of life built on a cosmic promise that had been irrevocably broken. We can picture one of the last families to leave, pausing on a high ridge to look back. They see the pyramids, their peaks just visible above the encroaching green canopy, like the bones of some great beast half buried in the earth. There is no sadness in their gaze, no longing for what was lost. There is only the weary relief of escape. They turned their backs on the spectacular stone failures of their god-kings and began the difficult, humble work of becoming something new, a people of the forest once more. The forest did not reclaim its territory with the fury of an invading army. It returned with the quiet, inexorable patience of a thing that knows it has all the time in the world. What was once the domain of kings became the province of roots and vines. But if we adjust our focus, if we look past the crumbling stone titans, we can find the people. Let us follow the faintest of trails, barely a whisper on the forest floor, until we arrive at a small clearing, alive not with the ghosts of a grand civilization, but with the murmur of a resilient one. Here, by the banks of a small, muddy river, we find the descendants of those who walked away. The settlement before us would be unrecognizable to the architects of Tikal. There are no pyramids, no sweeping plazas. We see instead a cluster of perhaps 20 houses built of pole and thatch, their forms organic and temporary, designed to be abandoned and rebuilt with the seasons. They are small, humble, and supremely practical. This is the world the Exodus created, a society atomized, broken down into its most basic durable unit, the village. The grand political experiment was over. What endured was family, clan, and the shared immediate need for survival. Here we can see a new social contract being written, not on stone stelae, but in the dirt floor of a communal cooking hut. Let us watch them work. A man is not clearing a vast field for a monoculture of maize. Instead, he tends a garden that is a chaotic, brilliant tapestry of life, a miniature version of the rainforest itself. Beans climb the stalks of the remaining corn, squash vines spread below to hold in moisture, and chili peppers and amaranth grow in the spaces between. This is not the agriculture of kings designed to feed 100,000. It is the horticulture of survivors, a diverse and resilient strategy that spreads the risk. If one crop fails, another will survive. They have stopped fighting the forest and have started learning from it again, rediscovering a wisdom their city-dwelling ancestors had forgotten. The gods, too, have been brought down to earth. Imagine a hunter deep in the diminished forest, making an offering not to a distant Jaguar god on a high temple, but to the spirit of the specific patch of woods he is in, a quiet prayer for a single brocket deer. The great unified pantheon has fractured into 1,000 local animisms. Chak, the mighty rain god, is no longer a cosmic entity to be appeased with royal blood. He is now the spirit of a particular cave, the guardian of a cenote whose waters have sustained a single village. The religion has become personal, intimate, and profoundly practical. We see them making offerings for a successful hunt or a healthy child, not for the glory of a divine king or the turning of a celestial cycle. They are praying for tomorrow, not for eternity. This was not a uniform retreat into a simpler past. We must remember the Maya world was vast and varied. While the great southern cities emptied, a different story was unfolding to the north, in the drier lands of the Yucatan Peninsula. Here, cities like Chichen Itza were not collapsing, but booming, drawing in refugees and forging a new, more militaristic and cosmopolitan society. They were a different expression of the Mayan spirit, one that traded astronomical precision for commercial acumen and open warfare. What we are witnessing is not a death, but a diaspora, a scattering of a people who were forced to reinvent themselves in a dozen different ways. They were no longer a single unified civilization. They had become a constellation of survivals. The constellation of survivals they created flickered with a new, hard-won light, but the great dark suns of their abandoned cities left a story of their own. That story was not written in glyphs. It was inscribed in the very substance of the world they had unmade. To read it, we must become detectives of a very different kind, trading the deciphered stele for the silent testimony of mud and bone. The Maya kings could not or would not chronicle their own failure, but the earth kept a meticulous record. Let us journey to a place like Lake Peten Itza, a vast expanse of water that bore silent witness to the rise and fall of kingdoms on its shores. Here, scientists have plunged long, hollow tubes deep into the lake bed, pulling up cylinders of accumulated sediment that are a perfect time capsule. We are looking at a history book written in layers of ancient mud. For centuries, as we scan down through the layers, the story is one of stability. We find the rich, diverse pollen of a mature rainforest, a fingerprint of a healthy, thriving world. Then, around 2,500 years ago, we see a dramatic change. The forest pollen suddenly plummets, replaced by a massive spike in the pollen of a single plant, maize. We are looking at the birth of their civilization, the first great clearing of the land. As we move up the core, closer to the time of the collapse, the story takes another dark turn. The maize pollen begins to thin, and a new signature appears: the pollen of tough, weedy species. This is the botanical ghost of exhausted, over-farmed land, a sign that the soil was giving up. And then, in the layers corresponding to the late 900s, we find the most chilling evidence of all. We see a thick, pale band of gypsum, a mineral that only precipitates out of water in the final stages of extreme evaporation. It is a stark, chemical photograph of a lake shrinking to a fraction of its size. Above this layer, the forest pollen slowly, tentatively begins to return. The evidence is unambiguous. The farmers left, the fields went fallow, and the jungle, after a very long wait, started to come back. This environmental indictment is not confined to the lake beds. Let us travel now to the human story, written in the remains of the people themselves. We enter the cool, quiet world of a royal tomb, a place of power even in death. Here we find the skeleton of a king, a man who was once considered a god. Yet, when bioarchaeologists examine his bones, they find a story not of divinity, but of disease. The telltale porousness of the skull and eye sockets speaks of severe chronic iron deficiency anemia. The fine horizontal lines etched into his teeth reveal periods of intense starvation during his childhood, when his body literally stopped growing to conserve resources. We are looking at a divine ruler who was, for much of his life, profoundly malnourished. Now, if a king who had first claim on every resource was suffering this way, imagine the plight of the common people. The evidence from their humble graves is a silent scream. We see skeletons of children riddled with signs of scurvy and rickets. We find adults whose average height had measurably decreased over the final generations, a classic indicator of a population under extreme nutritional stress. Their very bodies became a ledger of the failing world around them, recording the growing deficit of food and water. The Serpent Wars were not a cause of the collapse so much as a symptom, the last violent twitches of a society already dying of hunger. The Maya scribes wrote of their king's glorious victories, but their bones tell a more honest and far more tragic story of defeat. The bones in the south told a story of defeat, but this was not the end of the Maya story, merely the end of a chapter. To read the next part, we must lift our gaze from the suffocating green of the Petan rainforest and turn it north towards the flat, sun-blasted limestone shelf of the Yucatan Peninsula. Let us travel there to the year 1000 and find not silence, but a clamor. Here, the air is not thick with humidity, but with the fine dust of commerce and the sharp tang of salt from the sea. This was not a land of ghosts. This was a land of survivors. Their survival was rooted in a profound paradox. The southern lowlands, seemingly lush and water-rich, had died of thirst. The northern plains, a notoriously drier and more challenging environment, thrived. The secret, as is so often the case, lay hidden beneath their feet. Here we find no grand, man-made reservoirs. Instead, the earth itself is pockmarked with cenotes, vast natural sinkholes that are windows into a hidden world, a network of subterranean rivers, a secret and seemingly inexhaustible water supply gifted by the geology of the peninsula. We can imagine the relief of a refugee family from the south, stumbling out of the withered forest and seeing for the first time not a cracked mud basin, but a deep, cool pool of emerald water, a promise not from the silent gods above, but from the generous earth below. With this reliable source of water, the very foundation of power shifted. The king was no longer judged by his ability to plead with the rain god. His authority was now forged in a different crucible, the marketplace and the battlefield. We can picture the bustling port of an island like Isla Cerritos, the commercial hub for a powerhouse like Chichen Itza. Great sea canoes, some holding 40 men, arrive not with tribute for a divine lord, but with goods for a merchant prince. We see them unloading precious obsidian from the highlands of central Mexico, honey, cotton, and most importantly, salt, harvested from the vast coastal flats. This was a new Maya world, one connected not by sacred causeways, but by sea lanes, a world looking outward, not upward. This outward gaze brought new people, new ideas, and a new, harder edge to their society. Let us walk the grand plaza of Chichen Itza, and we see it immediately. The art is not one of serene kings communing with gods. It is a brutal and confident celebration of military might. We find the Tzompantli, a terrifying platform carved with row upon row of human skulls. We see stone warriors, not in the classic Maya style, but in the harder, more angular forms of invaders from the distant city of Tula, the legendary Toltecs. And everywhere we look, we see the enigmatic figure of a Chak Mul, a reclining man holding a bowl on his stomach, waiting for an offering that was likely a human heart. This was not a culture of cosmic balance. It was a culture of conquest. The very gods themselves were transformed. The feathered serpent, a deity known across ancient Mexico, arrived here with explosive force, becoming Kukulkan. The magnificent pyramid that dominates Chichen Itza is his temple, a stone mountain built not just to track the solstice, but to declare the arrival of a new, cosmopolitan, and fearsome order. The Maya of the North did not just survive the collapse, they reinvented themselves. They absorbed new people, new gods, and new ways of war, forging a hybrid civilization that was more pragmatic, more ruthless, and for a time more successful than anything that had come before. They were proof that a people are not their cities. They are their ability to adapt, to change, and to find water where no one else thought to look. But even this brutal, pragmatic reinvention was not immune to the great cycles of history. The success of the northern cities, built on trade and conquest, was merely a postponement of the inevitable. By the year 1200, the great powerhouse of Chichen Itza was in decline, its power unraveling not with the bang of a climatic catastrophe, but with the slow whimper of political infighting and shifting trade routes. The Toltec influence waned, the sea lanes grew perilous, and new city-states rose to challenge the old hegemonies. What we are witnessing is the final phase of the classic collapse, an echo that took 2 more centuries to play out. The Maya world did not end. It simply became smaller, more fractured, returning to the old patterns of competing local kingdoms that had existed before the rise of the great superstates. And this is where their story ceases to be a historical curiosity and becomes a mirror reflecting a disquieting image of ourselves. Let us now stand in the present day, not as unseen observers in the past, but as tourists in the shadow of a pyramid at Tikal. We can hear the chatter of 100 different languages and the click of 1,000 cameras. The Maya story, a cautionary tale of spectacular failure, has become a successful commercial enterprise. The irony is almost too perfect to bear. We travel here in climate-controlled buses, sipping bottled water, to marvel at the ruins of a civilization that died for lack of water, a death accelerated by their own alteration of the local climate. Here we must confront the uncomfortable parallels. The Maya felled their forests to fuel the lime kilns for their temples, their symbols of cosmic piety. We clear-cut the Amazon not for limestone plaster, But for cattle ranches and soybean fields, the monuments of our global economic system, they built their entire society on the assumption of a predictable, cyclical rainfall. We have built our global civilization on the assumption of a stable climate, an assumption our own science now tells us is dangerously false. When faced with the first signs of crisis, their divine kings doubled down on the very rituals that were exacerbating the problem, commissioning more temples that required burning more forest. When we are faced with our own environmental crises, do our leaders not call for more economic growth, the very engine that consumes our planet's finite resources? The fundamental error was the same, a profound collective blindness to the fact that their society was a wholly owned subsidiary of its environment, not the other way around. But there is one crucial, terrifying difference between them and us. The Maya could not read the chemical signatures in the lakebed mud. They had no satellites to show them the shrinking canopy of their world, no computer models to predict the consequences of their actions. They were brilliant, but they were working in the dark. We, on the other hand, can read our own future in ice cores from Antarctica and in the data streaming from our orbiting sentinels. The Earth is keeping a meticulous record of our own behavior, and unlike the Maya, we have the tools to read it in real time. The question that echoes from these silent stones is not what happened to the Maya. It is what we will do with their story. We walk away from their empty plazas and abandoned ball courts, leaving them to the howler monkeys and the encroaching jungle. We have seen how a brilliant civilization, convinced of its own permanence and divine favor, engineered its own collapse. Are we, with all our technology and knowledge, making the same fundamental error on a planetary scale? What do you believe? Join the conversation in the comments below. And to continue exploring the stories that define our world and our future, make sure you subscribe to our channel and activate your notifications.